Moin and welcome to our podcast.
I mean the kind of music men hum or whistle when they feel on top of the world.
We are Feli and Matic, both students at the European University in Flensburg, Germany, and today we want to present you the topic of our seminar called Value Conflicts in European Society, the Impact of Social Media, with Professor Monika Eigmüller and Stefan Wallaschek.
We will talk about the text. Exposure to opposing views on social media can increase political polarization by Bale and others. We invited a special guest to discuss the topic with.
Welcome back to our podcast. We are very pleased that we've been joined by Nataša Briški, who is a Slovenian journalist, publicist, and editor. Nataša lived as a correspondent also in the US, where she worked for an established Slovenian TV channel and reported on political developments and everything else straight from Washington. In 2018, she also took part in a very interesting Euro-Arab women's peace expedition to the North Pole. And now she works as a strategic communication expert and PR expert for a new platform called Meta's List, which is an NGO or an institute, and promotes people who bring change to society and also promote science. And she hosts several podcasts. But we would also like to give the chance to Nataša and welcome you to our podcast and ask you maybe to shortly present yourself and what you do to our listeners.
Yeah, dear Matic and Feli, thank you very much for inviting me to your podcast. So, as you said before, majority of my career has been in the media, mostly for traditional media, where I worked on the most watched television station in Slovenia, first as a sports correspondent, as a sports anchor woman, and then I spent almost 7 years in the US as a foreign affairs correspondent, a very interesting time. A time when all the biggest social media platforms were born, the Facebook, the Twitter, the Instagram. And so when I came back to Slovenia, which was in 2010, I was much more interested in the new media and the social media, what they can do, what changes they bring to the work of everyone in the media industry, in the communications, and as well in politics and many, many other forms of our activities. So for the past more than 10 years, I have been focused more or less on new media, social media, helping those who are maybe not very familiar with those platforms, how to communicate effectively, how to better convey your message. And with a couple of friends of mine, we founded an independent media network. It's called Meta's List, where we pay special attention to, I would say, responsible journalism. We do a lot of podcasts. We support young scientists. We have a couple of podcasts on young PhDs, on the biology, one on European Union, one on politics, and one on the media. So that is what takes, to be honest, most of my time. And when I'm not doing that, I try to, if people ask me or organizations also, train and educate as to how to understand the media, what's the difference between traditional and the new media. So that is basically what I do, strongly connected with the media, with communications, and still enjoying it.
Wow, yeah, thank you for your introduction. It sounds very exciting. And I would just start to introduce the text we read for our seminar. So in our society of today, the use of social media is almost natural. People use it for their daily dose of information and also for informing themselves about politics. Often the question comes up, how is social media actually impacting our values and political opinion forming, and with it, the political landscape? Terms like echo chambers, algorithms, and filter bubbles come often up to explain this polarization effect. In 2017, a team of scholars around Christopher Bale conducted a very interesting survey on this topic. They surveyed Democrats and Republicans and they used Twitter regularly, and they exposed them to views of the opposite party. The whole experiment was conducted on Twitter, and the participants were offered a money stimulant of $11 to $18 to follow a Twitter bot who retweeted contents from the opposite parties, for example, from NGOs or political leaders. And they followed these Twitter bots for 1 month, and afterwards the participants were surveyed again to measure the change of their views. The results were quite surprising, as the researchers found. The liberal views of the Democrats only increased a bit after this experiment, and the Republicans became very much more polarized, around 5 times more than the researchers expected. And the question would be to you now, what were your initial thoughts on the study, and could you relate to the findings at all, and did they surprise you?
To be honest, no surprise here. I joined Twitter in 2007. It was founded in 2006. And I remember it was only, referring to Slovenia, only a couple of us on Twitter. So it was kind of a, chat among friends. It was a very polite conversation. But the more people joined this platform, the uglier it got. Since I was in the US between 2003 and 2010 and was privileged enough to follow the Barack Obama campaign in 2008. It did not start with him, the more aggressive use of online platforms, but he was sort of the first one who was able to turn it into his advantage when he was able to get a lot of money for his campaign and therefore be competitive with Hillary Clinton and then with Republican candidate McCain. So you could not see in 2008 yet that many people on Twitter, meaning also not that much hate, not that much manipulation, and not that many fake news that would affect the end results. But, 8 years later with 2016 and the Trump campaign, things have changed. As I mentioned, a lot of people, the more people are online, the uglier it gets. It's not that, the absolute number is so big, whereas the ones who are communicating in a sort of an uncivil manner are very loud and have got in then president and before that a candidate Trump, someone who was a candidate for a very high position but was manifesting, I would say, not a communication you would like to see from people occupying the highest offices in whichever country. So about a couple of years later, after the US campaigns, that sort of communicating is becoming uglier and uglier. And that's the case in Slovenia as well. I've been noticing for the past couple of years, it's getting uglier and uglier. And people who are, before it may have been like 20% of the people were extreme right or extreme left, and about 60% of the rest somewhere in the middle. And now you can see, as also the research shows for the US, there's a huge polarization, and which shows also in the political language of not being able to form compromises, that sort of dealing in politics as we maybe have been used to before. So I would absolutely agree with all the findings. They are not surprising me, but not making me happy either. So I hope we'll find a way to sort of curb that wave of negativity and uncivility that is spreading in social media, especially so on the Twitter platform.
Thanks a lot. Actually, you took away some of our questions we already had for you prepared exactly about this time, because as you said, you lived in the US exactly at the time where all the social media platforms were born and where also political campaigns started to use this more regularly. So maybe just to add on what you said already. So you work for an established or the most viewed also news TV channel in Slovenia as a correspondent from the US. How did it change also maybe the reporting and the perception of the media once the social media networks were also introduced or were started to gain on popularity? How do you see this change? Did also maybe your work change, or the perception of the people and also the reach out, because you lived straight into those times of direct transformation.
Yeah, it's been like a huge change. Going back to maybe 2003 or 2004, I remember, okay, Skype is not a platform like Facebook or Twitter, but I remember we were not able to sort of do correspondence using Skype. It was free of use, a platform, which is nowadays not only Skype, but the similar ones, quite often used, because it's not as expensive as it used to be if you want to have like a correspondent joining you live. So it became easier to report from various parts of the world back to your channel, which was in my case Pop TV. So another thing was that 10, 15 years ago, also with the rise of the web media, you know, we were in the news organizations. If you had some exclusive news, you were guarding it till 7 p.m. for the nightly news or something. Maybe even so, you got it at, I don't know, 10, 11 a.m. You know, you tried to present to your viewers at 7 p.m. That's the big news of the day. Well, with the social media, that changed completely. The moment you have the news, you publish it. It used to be on the websites. Now, the Twitter is probably for the journalists a platform that is the quickest and that serves also breaking news kind of a platform to use. So, and I remember when I came back from the US, which was in 2010, as I said, I believe we were 2 or maybe 3 journalists in the newsroom with Twitter account. So the rest was sort of a, you know, joking, oh, are you using Twitter to chat and to share news when you're having a coffee or going out or something like that? Well, a year later, when I left Pop TV, the editors were already providing workshops for journalists as to how to use social media. And nowadays, from the newsrooms, I hear that when they're looking for new journalists or editors or anchor women or anchor men, they are paying attention as to what their social value is, meaning, do they have a large followership on social media? How could they promote, you know, our news to reach even more viewers, even more listeners, or even more readers? So it changed the line of our work completely. I would say not only the media is the industry with the impact of social media was so big, there are many others. You mentioned politics at the beginning as well. So for us, it became, you know, you have to do more in a shorter amount of time. 20 years ago, when I was anchor woman, you know, you had people who were doing the videos, who were doing the editing, who were doing, you know, various things. You were there just with a microphone and doing interview. Well, now all of us have to learn many different aspects of our work, like one woman, one man band. So yeah, the change is quite significant.
That's very interesting. I would just come to the next question. Do you see polarization is different across the media channels like Twitter, Facebook, Instagram?
Yeah, well, so for me as a journalist, the most valuable platform for the things that I do would be Twitter. I am connected with interesting people, with news organizations that I'm interested to hear what they have to say from colleagues, journalists around the world. It's the fastest one, and it's the one that I do check most regularly. And I do, as I've said before, I do notice it's a huge polarization, whereas even though we haven't agreed on something, we could still have you know, substantial debates on Twitter. Now there is less and less of that. As for Facebook, I consider that more, I mean, I do have the maximum amount on my profile, which is about 5,000 so-called friends, which means like a lot of updates on your timeline and so on. But I do consider that account more like informing, not so much about my work, even though also, but more, you know, the casual stuff, what I do when I'm not occupied doing PR or journalism or things like that. So on that account, it's very valuable. You get a different sort of audience, maybe more professional kind of on Twitter. It's less people there. In Slovenia, we're talking about maybe registered about 250,000 accounts. I'm more into politics, and with some of the research done recently, that means about 30,000 are active. And then we went a bit deeper into that, and we found out that maybe 10,000 of us on Twitter are super active when it comes to conveying news, talking politics, commenting, and stuff like that. On Facebook, the numbers are, as you know, like much, much, much bigger. It's more than 1 million in Slovenia on Facebook, but I do consider that account and use it more like friends and family, and not so much for professional communication. I feel like that a bit less control as to how to control what people can do or how to respond on that channel. On Twitter, it's a bit easier with the block and mute buttons, which can come quite handy sometimes. And for Instagram, that account is still kind of clean, is more all about photos, not so much about information, even though that has been changing recently. There is another account I see it's on the rise for a couple of years now, and that is LinkedIn. Of course, I could say TikTok, but that is for younger ones and mostly having fun. Not so much the information, not so much about debating. So LinkedIn I see as an account also, which is still, due to smaller numbers as well, kind of clean, but more for people who are like businessmen and women. You can see, valuable stuff there. But as I said, for me as a journalist, number one, Twitter, because of its speed, because of who I can find there. Facebook, valuable for slightly different audience kind of debate. Instagram, there are a couple of accounts in Slovenia or a couple of politicians who are using it to their advantage and using it quite well, but it has not been the account for media, politics, journalists, at least not according to my experience.
Thanks a lot for that. I think it's very, very much also in line with what we are observing in a way, also in other countries. To relate to that, and as one of active Twitter followers of yours, I would also like to ask you, because you said at the beginning already that you are also recording podcasts in the political sphere or that deal with politics. One is Evropska Četrt, or the EU quarter, let's say, where you discuss more topics of the EU. And the other one is LDGD, which is very much about Slovenian politics. And as far as I'm aware, one of the few, if not the only podcast that really talks so directly about politics in Slovenia. So you do it together with 3 other colleagues. So my question would be, how is the echo or what the feedback of those podcasts that are more political? Because we know that politics is not such a topic that would be selling itself or that would be super popular. But somehow I have the feeling that your podcasts have quite a lot of feedback and echo, so that they have a reach out as well. So is there much feedback you receive directly from the topics that you discuss? Or also, with other words, did it ever happen that you also get approached by those ones that you discuss them, so the politicians themselves, that they would reach out and try to clear their name or something like that? So I'm really interested in this perspective.
Yeah, that's quite a popular podcast. We started with it on, believe it or not, April 1st, 2 years ago, in 2019. So me and Aljaž, we are the co-anchors. And I remember Aljaž was a bit skeptical as to, will we have enough substance, enough topics to talk about every 2 weeks? And I had no doubt at all that it would be fun and we would have our hands full of interesting stuff to talk about. So it's four of us. Me and Aljaž, we're both journalists, and Ante Šakorjan, who is also part of it, he's also an established journalist who has been covering politics for many years, and Andraž Zorko, who is part of the team. He is the statistician. He has an agency that does a lot of research into our behavior, into the popularity of politicians and stuff like that. We knew that if we would be sterile in our conversation, not many people would listen to us. That does not mean that we are not respectful, just that we are trying to be as honest as we can, debate as we would have a coffee and discuss current political events. And I believe all of us, are kind of a witty and have a sense of humor, and that landed quite well among our listeners. So we are very satisfied with how it's going. Our listener base is growing from month to month, and with that, we are pretty sure from the response we get, the people that listen to us and also the politicians that we talk about, that they know about a podcast. On some instances, we do get a response either online on Twitter or other platforms. Sometimes we get in our private messages comments, but that's also something we have been expecting, doing journalism and media for more than 20 years. So it's not something new. We are just using another platform to talk sincerely, openly, and I believe everyone with a CV that can make our listeners sort of comfortable, that they have a feeling that we know what we are talking about. As I said, we try to be respectful, but still critical, to left, right, to everyone who finds him or herself in between. It's been very well for us. We have a couple of segments in a podcast that try to make people smile, also laugh about some things, even though we are living in a serious time. But sometimes the seriousness of certain events can be best put in a sort of a humorous way. You guys maybe know from the US media field, John Oliver or Jon Stewart, these guys who have more humorous night talks, but yet are considered to do the best investigative journalism there is, even more than traditional sort of, CNN, NBC, Fox News, and so on. So people, especially younger ones, turn to comedians to explain them the serious stuff. We are not comedians. I definitely do not think that. But still, that is an important part. So serious stuff, but try not to be too serious about it.
Yeah, it's interesting because you're mentioning comedians. I mean, in Slovenia, we had a comedian who was a prime minister, and Ukraine has a comedian as a president. So
yeah that's a new black.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, no, I can definitely confirm also I'm very much fan of your podcast, both which deal with politics. So the format I really love. And I really like also because, in the established media or at the news at 7 or whatever, you have not enough time basically to discuss a certain political topic more into detail. So I think this format as a podcast is a great addition to it.
Yeah, thanks. We said we're going to have a 35-minute podcast, and Matic, since you are a regular listener, you know how well we are at that, reaching that target.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, to follow up on that topic, maybe some kind of a bit of a provocative question, because in this paper also there is a lot about polarization. So maybe for you also being from the field, how do you see then this polarization? For me, some kind of provocative question I ask myself always is Trump a winner of this polarization, or Janša in Slovenia, for example, the current prime minister? Because these are figures that want to polarize, and they are polarizing intentionally on social media. Even Politico, as you know, named the prime minister Janša Marshal Twitter. So are those figures the winners of this kind of social media polarization, or would you say the opposite is the case? So that we know in the US with Trump, the turnout was huge after he was elected, then in the midterm elections, and also now in the last US elections. Is this kind of a positive thing out of it, or how do you see this polarization that comes through the social media?
Yeah, you mentioned Trump and Slovenian Prime Minister Janša as, are they winners? That depends on what would you consider a winner. I mean, Trump definitely won the elections using social media well to his advantage. By saying using well, that does not mean that those would be the rules and ways of communication I would vote for or I would recommend. Definitely not, but it worked for him. He managed to manipulate many. He was very good for the media. The ratings were up. There were more issues sold whenever there was Trump or they were printing Trump saying something, even though they knew it was not true. I mean, if a winner means polarizing people, if a winner means increased lying, if a winner means manipulating the truth or spreading the disinformation, then the guys mentioned would be winners. For me, a winner would be someone who could show the path forward where we would, of course, not agree on everything, but still try to find solutions that would be good for the majority. Someone who would know how to communicate respectfully to each other. And those would be, for me, some characteristics I would attach to a winner. So yes and no would be an answer to your question. According to my criteria, those guys are not the winners, and neither are we who are the targets.
Yeah, it's what we were also thinking, but probably in terms of politics, looking short term for them, it's only campaign from one to another. So probably, of course, the time will show, but Trump definitely isn't also a winner in this sense with the second election or re-election that didn't succeed. And of course, for a Slovenian prime minister or whatever, we will also see after there will be elections. But I think Feli has another question, right?
Yeah, so I would like to ask you about the future of Europe now during times of Corona and afterwards. Will the social media landscape have an impact on future politics in Europe in general?
Well, European Union and the European Commission is definitely the place in the world at the moment where they are trying to do something regarding the civility of the communication on the social media platforms. They are aware of the spread of misinformation. There has been many projects and a lot of money available in the past couple of years for projects that deal with that kind of challenges that we are faced with. I can't see as a plus in that regard or in that kind of topic that there is 27 countries part of the EU, and to reach some of the solutions you need unanimity when it comes to voting. So I do hope that we would or they would be persistent enough on that path, which is not easy, and where European Union is a pioneer who is being, as I can see it, the most sincere so far with the most concrete actions to make social media platforms a safer place for all of us. I mean, they're also the ones who are pressing the social media platforms such as Facebook, Twitter, to come with solutions as to the spread of misinformation and lies. You mentioned COVID, that regarding the vaccines and how to tackle the challenges that we have been faced with in the past year and a half. It's been an issue. Because the words floating around or the theories floating around are not something that is good for all of us. So there are attempts that directions. I do hope that we would stay on course, because it's not a problem cannot be solved from Thursday to Friday. It will take years, decades probably, to find solutions. We do have rules and regulations, and I'm not saying we need to rule and regulate everything, but for our offline world, we know what is allowed and what not. Online world, it's a lot of small print, what it's allowed or not, but not enough control or not enough oversight as to what's been done.
Okay, thanks a lot for these insights. And we would come to our final question, and we would kind of copy it from your podcast, Meta's Tea, where at the end you always ask the guests to share something interesting, an anecdote or something from this branch or from this sector. So I hope we didn't get you now unprepared, but I'm sure you have many stories to share. We wanted to ask you, is there something that you think we should, or our listeners should know, that is not yet very much discussed, or an anecdote or something from your side?
Can you maybe think of a recent event or something that you followed up that you found very interesting on social media or that surprised you somehow?
Well, on social media, what I'm following is also some investigative channels. The one thing that amused me a lot was, and Matic, you will probably be aware of, we have an investigative platform channel in Slovenia called Podčrto, and they did a research on how some political parties are using social media, and the results that they came up with was that the biggest political party in Slovenia is apparently having an army of sort of trolls who post various things as regular people, but still are there on a mission. So when it coincided, they published this research on astroturfing, and I believe within a day when they published it, we found out that one of the most visible members of the party, Alenka Jeraj, was doing exactly that on Twitter that they were researching. So astroturfing, presenting herself among another name and posting tweets that are very positive towards the biggest political party, which is her own party. And Kopriva, I don't remember how Kopriva would be in English, but she chose a very interesting name for her other Twitter account. So that was a lot of fun to follow in that days. You had a serious investigation of Podčrto and Danes je nov dan. Those are two organizations that were involved with it. And then within a day, the research would be well published around in other media and with a lot of publicity. But with this member of the biggest political party turning out to be one of those trolls, part of the operation, it seemed, that was a big surprise because she is not a rookie. She's been there for 20-25 years and still made a beginner's mistake. So that was, for us, following social media and politics was quite interesting.
Thanks for sharing that, yeah.
Nataša, if listeners want to follow you or hear more from you, where can they find you? And is there content in English?
Well, we do sometimes publish, when we have international guests, some of our podcasts in English, but majority, yes, are in Slovene language, as is my Twitter account at DC43, mostly in Slovene, but also publishing certain things in English or, sharing articles that are in English.
Okay, perfect. Then thanks a lot, Nataša, for being our guest on our very first podcast. See you on the Twitter landscape.
Yeah, and thank you again, guys, for interesting questions and for inviting me to be your first guest.
Yeah, thank you. It was very exciting and super interesting, and we will take you for sure.
Thank you. All the best, guys, with your work.
Thanks a lot, Nataša. Enjoy your day. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you for tuning in, and make sure to also listen to the other podcasts of our seminar.
You can also follow us both on Twitter under @CorinthFeli and @Germovšek. If you want, you can also subscribe to the YouTube channel of our study program, EUCS, or European Cultures and Society, or to the YouTube channel of our university, EUF Flensburg.